If I find myself in a meeting with Rudy Yakym, I know I'm in a place of substance, and it is awesome. I have really enjoyed getting to know Rudy, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts tonight, without the spin, without the rhetoric, and just get down to the issues at hand, and look forward to kind of what he has to say. Rudy is an absolute expert. He came to this place wanting to make change, wanting to do the right things. He came in tragedy. With Jackie Leworski, that was a shocker to everybody, and it just, it kind of set a tone in our office to be more careful, and it's so fragile and all that. And I remember, like, she reverberated throughout the entire Congress. She's an amazing person, and when I was trying to get on Ways and Means, it was, to me, I care a lot about adoption for foster children. So you mentioned, anytime somebody starts with an accolade that you were awarded, and they start it with, I've never really heard of this thing, but it must be a pretty big deal. It got me an amazing close relationship with the Wendy's organization. I got to meet Dave Thomas when I was, 17 years old, and he handed me the award himself. And it was an amazing thing. And then I became really close with that organization, and that's what made me such an advocate for foster care adoption, right? The data isn't just like, when a child times out of foster care without familial relationships to continue on with some bit of consistency in your life, this isn't just a 2 to 3% issue. We're talking 50, 60% drug addiction, homelessness, overdose. When kids time out of foster care, it is an enormous burden on our society. And within the Ways and Means Committee and within the Work and Welfare Subcommittee, which I, really fought hard to be on. It was one of the lower subcommittees, and so it was available, but that's what I chose to go after. It's kind of a sacred duty, and I'm really excited about it. And it stems from things that happened in when I was in high school, throughout my life. So real quick, I'll just head on, and I would love to just make time for Rudy and for questions. We don't fix our fiscal problems in this country without fixing our budget process. And Rudy and I are on budget committee, and Rudy's going to be on Ways and Means as soon as it is humanly possible. Let's win the majority back and get Rudy onto Ways and Means. I hope that's just becoming an inevitability, as we need really substantive members to be there. I have one bill with Americans for Prosperity that would take in the entirety, and we don't fix our fiscal situation until we fix the budget process. We don't address the real issues until we force members of Congress to vote on our budget. When I go back home and tell people that the $1.2 trillion bill, that 80% of it was to support defense, which is like my district, Hill Air Force Base, second largest Air Force base in the country, and I'm just getting roasted back home for this, right? When I lay it out for them, I show them the data, and I show this all the information, they're like, well, why would I be frustrated at you for supporting that, especially when it's, my goodness, you're telling me that this whole entire process is less than a quarter of the entire budget. Well, what about the other stuff? And I'm like, that's the point. We're not doing it. So the Congressional Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act that we introduced a few months ago would force us to take into consideration the entirety of it. But actually, this may be an unpopular opinion, but it would get rid of the Byrd rule. It would get rid of budget reconciliation and force us to be adults back here and actually, get involved. We're now in the point where we're just doing once in a generation legislating, and it happens every 4 years when the House, White House, and Senate switch back and forth, because whenever it changes, you're always mad at that party, and it comes back and it goes back and forth. And we're not doing enough with that process. We actually need to be doing stuff when we're not in that budget reconciliation phase. And I've communicated that to my lovely Senate Republican colleagues, that a very good tax bill we shouldn't have to wait till we have the White House, and Senate to do anything. We should be able to compromise and do good things, and I'm hopeful that we can get there. So there's a myriad of things to talk about. I will end with this. Feels very weird to be excited about a potential Ukraine vote as a Republican, and that's because I just went through FISA. And when you are blessed to be in the same delegation as the good senator from Utah, Mr. Mike Lee, FISA was not an easy thing to be on the opposite side of him for back home, but it is what it is. I know I did what I felt was the right thing for our nation, and we are not violating the Fourth Amendment by Section 702. And I took some tough votes, and we'll get through it. But yeah, I'm like, geez, if I can get through that, I can get through anything. A lot of booze this weekend at my county conventions. So your support and involvement in us and helping us navigate this as members is very much appreciated. So I just thought about that today. I'm like, geez, I'm like looking forward to a Ukraine potential vote when I just went through something what I didn't think was going to be so wild. So thank you all. Love the engagement. Appreciate the relationships, and let's keep at it.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Blake, and thank you, Jim, for the kind introduction, and for all of you for hosting us today. I've got a few of my teammates with me, Ben Fulkowski in the back, my chief of staff, and Bridget Visconti. Bridget is on our legislative team and runs all national security, budget affairs, and we'll be talking a little about budget affairs and healthcare as well. So thank you both for being here. Blake, I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. You know, it's been great to see you come up in leadership in the House now as our House Conference, or Republican House Conference Vice Chair. You obviously, I think you've got a lot of long runway ahead of you. But I will say this, Blake if we get through FISA. But I will say this, you know, based on the introduction you just heard from Blake, I mean, you've got a pretty good Oppo research team there, Jim. You make a good Oppo research guy. I mean, to know about my smoker in the backyard, that's great work. Come on over. We do make some good ribs. But Blake, as you heard from the introduction, is everything I am not in terms of an athlete. He has all the athletic ability that I do not have. Ben Fulkowski could certainly verify that. But I will also add to that about Blake. When I first showed up here on day one in Congress, you know, I've got a background in business. And so when you're in business and you're going into something new, you're trying to get your hands on everything you could possibly read. And you're trying to absorb everything you can possibly absorb. And so part of the long range mission I'm on is to help just bend the curve to ultimately restore fiscal responsibility to Washington. And as I was getting my hands on things to read, I stumbled across a 10-page memo. Do you remember this? I stumbled across this 10-page memo that Blake Moore wrote about restoring fiscal responsibility to Washington. And I find Blake on the floor and I tell him that I had read his memo, and the shocked look on his face that someone took the time to read the memo. So I will say Blake's been a leader on those issues for quite some time, and it's truly an honor to call you a colleague. I do hope to join you soon on the Ways and Means Committee. As Blake mentioned, you know, we're co-chairs of the Works Caucus. Part of what we believe as co-founders of that caucus, and we do have two Democrat counterparts on that, is that, you know, the United States Congress, we obviously spend a lot of money, and we have these new bills, these new initiatives, these new programs, these new grants to go out and accomplish something. But we never actually take the time to go back and review and say, did that work? What are the criteria that we're going to evaluate success by? And how are we going to think about future success of something that we're setting up today downrange? As you all know, once you establish a dollar in our federal system, it just seems like it is there forever. And we never actually evaluate it. So what we're in the process of doing is getting feedback on how we would evaluate it and what are some of the things that we could do that actually work from an evidence-based perspective to make our House and our budget a better process. Speaking of budget processes, as Blake mentioned, we serve on budget committee together, but Chairman Arrington asked me to serve as the chair of the Budget Process Reform Task Force. And what we're starting to do is take a look at ways that we can actually reform our budget process, something we haven't done since 1974. I mean, to think of the fact that we haven't reformed our budget processes in 50 years, half a century, I think is just totally egregious. And so, you know, we've already passed a few things out of our Budget Process Reform Task Force and ultimately sent on to the House floor. It's things like the Fiscal Commission Act of 2023. It's things like Dr. Michael Burgess's Preventive Health Savings Act, which, as you all know right now, the CBO takes a 10-year budget window when evaluating everything. The problem with that as it relates to preventative health is you oftentimes don't get the savings until the 20 or 30-year mark. If you're doing things that are good in your 40s, as some of us are, you don't get the benefit until you're 65. So you gotta be able to take a longer term picture. The CBO Data Sharing Act, the CBO, a lot of our federal agencies don't share the kind of data that they should share with the CBO for us to get an accurate picture. That bill has gone on and off the floor. And then, you know, sometimes it's small things that matter, like eliminating Useless Reports Act, right? There's a lot of useless reports. We know where they are and we want to remove and eliminate them. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, we've already done already, just to get the muscle memory restored on the budget committee of what it means to pass bills out of the budget committee and move them on and off the floor. And what we're looking at now is what is the next layer of things that we can do that are a bit of a heavier lift on our budget process reform task force. So when we first set this up, we actually did what most of you do in business, is we had a kind of old-fashioned whiteboard session where we just put everything on the wall. We came up with how many ideas, Bridget, in 1 hour? I mean, it was
like 2 dozen.
Yeah, at least a couple dozen. Just fill the whiteboard of here's a few things we think we can start with. Then we just segment it out on layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3. So it's the same process we use in our business careers. We just said, why can't that work here? And so far so good.